That is what I'm talking about an environment where we teach this innate disparagement, but you need someone to be like, you know what? I got the power and I'm willing to wield that power because I'm going to invest in you as an individual. And it was right then I said that is what I'm talking about, the profession. That is when we start to talk about disparagement, and that is the fix.
Welcome to the PAWCast.
Hey guys, it's Dr. Carlo Riolo. I'm just going to do a quick intro to these next several segments of our PAWCast. If you go to pawhealth.net/PAWCast, that's PAWCAST. But if you go to the website, we actually have both the video and the audio content there for sort of viewing and listening. But below that on the website, we actually will start to upload PDFs that would be applicable to any type of content that we're discussing. So these first several series of videos is actually going to be focusing on the PAW Health Network industry overview. And this is basically, again, you can have the PDF for download, but it has all of the talking points that we're going to use initially in the center of our industry overview for problems that we have in the profession. But then as we start to expand out on our PAWCast content, the outer portions of that industry overview, which are these portions in blue, actually are solutions and talking points on ways in which we can actually improve the profession. So again, if you go to pawhealth.net/PAWCast, you'll actually be able to download and follow along in these next several segments. The three main parts that we're talking about in the center of the industry overview is actually for culture, talent, and service. Those are some of the three biggest problems we currently have in the profession, and has been the focus of our strategic plan for the last several years. But again, if you download the PDF and follow along, these next several video segments and audio segments for the podcast are actually going to be on the culture, talent, and service. So stay tuned. When we start to talk about, the broken hierarchy, is that's exactly what we're talking about. Is there's so much weighted upon every single member of the team that you have to value every member of the team.
Yeah.
And that's where, kind of like we had talked before, is that front staff position. It's like you have to have. I mean, what's the caregiver support guide? How long is that? 80.
It's now 62 pages.
62 pages long, and just beginning of day, end of day, middle of the day, tasks you have to do, this. It's incredibly complex. Individually, it would take one piece out of that caregiver support guide. Very simple.
Right.
But the connections, the way you have to keep it all sorted in your brain, what am I supposed to be doing? And it's, follow up. And it all comes back, of course, to what the name of the position is caregiver support.
Right.
A failure on that, a failure on callbacks, a failure on people calling in to provide the correct information, failure for the people who are actually sitting in the lobby as far as getting updates, how long is this going to take? Where is my patient? All those different types of things. It is a significant reducer of caregiver stress when they are in the hospital.
Oh, yeah.
To have someone competent up front. If you don't have that, it all just goes out the window.
Yep.
And honestly, even for those complaints that have run up to state board review, it's still at its core has always come back to front staff.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that there hasn't been circumstances where, maybe the doctor should have been a little less prickly. I'm not saying that, but I'm not necessarily placing blame on the front staff. I think a part of,
the team receives the complaint.
Yeah, the team receives the complaint.
However, the better we communicate up front, especially even before they walk in the door.
Yeah.
As soon as they...
Oh, absolutely.
Dude, I hit this point the other day where it was like, oh yeah, I know how to say this now.
Yep.
I figured it out. I finally got my talk path down, and I'm gonna. It's kind of like you when I had first started. You talked about how you explain euthanasia the same way every single time.
Every single time.
I finally hit that with talking to people on the phone.
Yep.
And ever since then, it's either I'm not comfortable with that and I'm not going to show up, and I say that's okay.
Right.
It's up to you.
Right.
This is what it is.
Yes.
Or they're like, cool.
Yep. See you when we get there.
Yeah.
Right.
There's no middle ground because the confusion is what pisses people off.
Absolutely.
I think.
Absolutely. Well, no, that was actually just this last weekend we had a caregiver through who, I think admittedly, on his side, this gentleman is very, very fast to hear a part of a sentence and then draw his own conclusion at the end of the sentence. So he's going to hear the first part and he's going to assume the rest. Well, it was a circumstance where he had talked to, Grant, who was running the front end. Grant was the only one answering calls at that time. It was specifically at, 5:15 p.m. So the other, we had already had shift change. The 3 girls were there. None of them answered the phones. And it was part of our, toxicology spiel, where it's like, okay, we understand your patient has toxin exposure. You can definitely bring your patient in. Our initial office exam is blank, but we always coordinate with poison control. Always coordinate with poison control. And part of what he had drawn the conclusion on was that, you can't help me. So the guy had then heard, well, you guys don't have a toxicologist, so you can't help me. You can't treat my animal. And when he had heard, we were like, animal poison control's fee is, $65. Didn't hear that right. He heard our initial fee is $600. So in his brain, it was, I'm coming in with a $600 fee and no one's even going to be able to help me. So the moment he came in the front door, he was firing off to Grant, to the technicians, to even when I came in, it was just, he had a book in front of him. He was just reading it and just looking over the top like, And, I was like, all right, not everyone has great experiences. And what I've learned over the years is that we can't take on their energy. And I think that's part of this bubble that I've created around myself. And I hope to get that over to the team as well. But a part of it is I'm like, if someone's mad, it doesn't have anything to do with me.
No.
They're frustrated about the circumstance. They're frustrated about whatever's bringing them through the door. And as soon as we take that on to now where we're mad, we're frustrated, we're upset, it all goes to hell.
Right.
And it's very, very hard to not buy into it. And I think part of that is we talk about personality, but I think, part of it, with the TriCore assessment and what is, is this, they hate me versus they hate the situation. So it was starting to kind of get out of control rapidly, and, so Megan, she comes in back, one of our technicians, she comes in back and she's like, oh, he's already saying da 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 da. And he was like, so I was like, you know what? Nope. I don't have time to talk to this guy right now and straighten him out. But it has immediately surfaced to the top of our triage protocol.
Right.
Because if I don't get this guy under control in a very short amount of time, I got a lobby full of people who the more he fires his mouth off, the more he's going to make those people anxious about what's happening with our services. More importantly, as we start to get through this process, when we start to provide blood results, we start to hospitalize this patient, we start to have this case go south. If he's not listening to what it is I'm saying, it's going to turn into, you never told me that this was going to be a problem. You never adequately informed me of this. You never.
Yeah.
He was a blame placer.
Yeah.
So I went right into, and so the girls come back and, it was just, they could just see me. It was just one of these where I was just starting to turn my head and I was like, and it was just boom. Nope. I trust my team. I trust what Grant said on the phone. I wasn't there when Grant answered the phone, but I know what Grant says when he answers the phone because Grant's not going to deviate because there is not even necessarily a written protocol. There are some script answers for, like you said, but you have to figure it out in your brain, the way the words come out of your mouth.
Yep.
So I had trust in my team, and that's, of course, being one of our core values, that they had done their jobs right and that no one was lying to me because they knew in our environment, like we said before, I don't care if people make mistakes.
Right.
Why would I care? It always turns into us, that the individual owning the problem to us creating a solution and implementing it. I mean, we are so high on that accountability ladder all the time. It's not scary when there's a mistake,
No.
So that was that I went right into this room and I was like, we're going to figure this out right now. And the wife who, clearly she's in a relationship with this man, you could tell that there were times, because I had spoken to her separately. And when he came in, she's, he's just that way. He's just that way. And it was like, he's not going to be that way today. I said, because we are here to help you and we are here to help your patient. I said, when we start to detect animosity, I said, not everyone has and can speak as direct as I can. I'm like, I'll talk direct to you. I don't care.
Right.
I say, so not everyone has that where they're going to start to feel negative. They're going to start to take on this energy, start to take on these emotions. I said, I can't have that happen within my staff. I said, because this is what we're here for. We're here to help patients and we need to maintain, our procedure. We need to maintain our unity. We need to maintain all this while we're going through this. And then, the gentleman had come back in the room and he started going through, well, I was told this and I was told this. Not by anyone on my team.
Right.
And at the end of it, you could tell, he was like, well, it's water under the bridge. So rather than like acknowledging, oh, I may have been wrong in this situation, it's like, well, it's behind us, so let's just move past it. And I said, no, that's not going to work for me. I'm like, let's just one thing. I said, because as we move forward, I said, you need to be able to trust anything that comes out of mine and my team's mouth. I said, so it is water under the bridge, but just acknowledge and understand that we're here to treat your patient, and that's our primary objective.
Right.
And I said, so at no point in time will there continue to be confusion from my team. I said, if you become confused with my team, I said, you can come right to me or you can come to anyone else to clarify that. I said, because we're talking about a very serious situation, a very serious intoxicant, and there isn't going to be any opportunity for us to continue to be confused. And he was like, okay. And then that was it.
Yeah.
Teddy bear.
Right.
And I think that's where we start to talk about core values. We start to talk about cultural issues in the profession. We start to talk about that. And this is all circling back to how we started this diatribe, was the strength of the front end.
Right.
Is if we start to have any individual, and we have that weak link, any individual
at any level.
At any level, it doesn't matter, front end, back staff, is then it's like, well, who's gonna deal with this problem now? Who's going to deal with this problem now? Who's going to deal with this problem now? And having our ground floor administration, I mean, that's part of the broken hierarchy, is that it's not, we're, on high, passing judgment down. That's not how we work. We have administrators there. We have people with higher training there. We have senior staff, we have all these people, but it's still the same objective: serve the patient, serve the patient, serve the patient. But you will sort out those weak links in a very short amount of time.
Oh, absolutely. It's funny too that you bring up the hierarchy thing, because you went from the top down, like that was your perspective on it, and I get where that comes from.
Yep.
My initial thought was bottom up. So if there's no administration there and the shit does hit the fan in some way, shape, or form, and no one's there to actually fix it, what does everyone do? Oh, well, you're just gonna have to take that up with this person. With my manager, and they'll call you when they get around to it.
Right.
And that's the only way they can deal with this
Absolutely.
shit. Because if they take it into their own hands, especially in a very hierarchical organization, and they mess it up this much, they're gonna get rammed. It's not gonna be pretty at all. So they end up just deferring as
all
much
problems.
as they can up. Well, that just builds a habit of the problems start big, that they, and respectfully so, if it's a big problem, move it up.
Yeah, absolutely.
They get smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. And now our blood machine doesn't work.
Call the CEO.
Exactly. Like, no, just problem solve a little bit. But
Right.
I think that's a perfect segue into this hurricane thing, because that's just a symptom of how so many things are busted. And now we talked about it last week, where we have this set of people that are so amazingly skilled at problem solving. That don't do it.
Correct. And it's, I think the eye of the hurricane, the eye of the storm, I think it really is the perfect analogy, because it's the same thing. Like, what happens when natural disasters actually occur? Natural disasters rarely occur for more than a few days to a week.
Right.
So for us to assume that we have just this one problem that's going to be, now let's go ahead and exclude global climate change, because that is a constant ongoing problem. We're talking about the effects of that. So whether we're talking tropical storms, ocean acidification, all those types of things. So if we get into the kind of these smaller things and saying, well, no, there's always a cleanup crew. There's always something that comes after. There's always rebuilding afterwards. I think for me, what I kind of find funny is, you're exactly right, is we're all highly skilled at problem solving and we don't do it. I think there's kind of two ways you can problem solve an issue. And I think for me, I kind of laugh, because for me, I'm a doctor, right? So what I have been taught to do, or at least understand and recognize, is disease prevention and early disease detection. That's a huge part of what we try to do on the wellness side, is just prevent it. And if it's there, find it early.
Right.
That is not what medicine is, especially not in America, is that it's, we have a huge problem. What can we do to fix it?
Yeah.
What drugs do we have? What treatments do we have? So I do kind of, there's two sides to the hurricane. So one side of the hurricane is you have to fix the aftermath, but the other side is how do you prevent the hurricane? And so I think, where all of us are at, and I think that's part of our hurricane analogy, is we're very much on like the fix it side. Let's pop through the other side of that hurricane and figure out what the cleanup crew has to do. And it's going to be pretty much the same cleanup every single time we clean something up, but it's going to be a little bit different. Your cleanup in Alabama is going to be different from cleanup in Alaska, but for the most part, it is about the same.
Right.
You can only have floods so many ways. You can have a flood cleanup crew so many ways.
Right.
But I think the prevention side, I think that really attests to and speaks to where integration with universities, integration with shelters, integration with mentorship programs, that's how you really kind of prevent these natural disasters. You sort of prevent the hurricanes because you're catching it at a different part of the problem. We're trying to catch students before they have significant problems as postgrads or even pre-grads, really.
Yeah.
Shelter integration. You start to integrate with shelter medicine, you are actually on the community level. It is a public health, it is a community support activity to integrate with shelters.
Yep.
So when you kind of start to look at that side, and mentorship, of course, integrates into both the student side and the shelter engagement side. But the idea is that's how you treat and prevent the hurricane. But then the other side is there's so much work on this side is you have to run both tandem.
It's just playing with that metaphor. It's almost as if you're just fortifying everything after. So like when it hits again, because it's probably going to.
Absolutely.
You just have less destruction. You have more stable pillars that are ready for it.
Big stone pillars. No more straw huts.
Old farm beams.
Yes, old farm. These massive barns with huge pillars, and exactly. They just don't make them that way anymore.
No.
And I think the other thing too. I mean, if you bring barns into it, you can't find that wood anymore.
No.
You can't find good quality wood like that.
No.
But again, yes, I think you're exactly right. I think it is fortification. And I think, think about anyone who lives in Hurricane Alley, anyone who lives in, floodplains, anyone who lives in these areas, is that, the technology that is developed in those areas always fortify for the natural disasters you see regularly. There's no way you would find, someone up in the northern tip of the UP have a hurricane shelter,
right?
Or I'm sorry, a tornado shelter. It just wouldn't really exist.
No.
But you definitely would find that down into the, southern plains and down and through there. But anyway,
there's with all of that, basically what it is
you prevent.
There's predictive analysis that can be put into, and really what I would call that, honestly, is problem solving.
Yeah.
What is predictive analysis? It's taking a set of variables and saying, okay, this happened. It's the two sides. This happened. This could happen.
Right.
So we're playing on the this could happen side.
Simultaneously.
As well as this shit all happened. Yeah. So let's gather it all up, see what we have left, and then start to rebuild it so that when it happens again, how are we better?
Well, and I think that's sort of the ingrained tradition that is our profession, is that, I felt it myself, just this last winter. What I identified is we were breaking new ground for the first 2 to 3 years of ownership, of this particular clinic. Now, again, 2 to 3 years of ownership, it was actually about 5 to 6 years of planning and problem solving and solution creating and so on and so forth. It's for us, we were owning it, we were creating solutions, and we were coming into the implementation phase once we had purchased. So we were into that implementation phase.
Actually business planned.
Yeah, right. But part of that was the comfort level. As I felt it, it's like we were blazing trails. We were blazing this new ground, and we were doing things that no one else was doing. Definitely in the Wisconsin area, let alone the profession. And then it was, you start to feel it, where you're like, oh, I've put all of this work into it. I want to protect this. I want to make sure it doesn't go away. And then you sort of settle into complacency. You're like, well, yeah, I think I'm just going to continue to function within this. And it's like, but hold on a second. You can't function within this particular egg anymore. You know, you have to pop out of that because you have to keep it moving. You can't just stay in this nice little bubble. But that is the story of our profession, is that we had these trailblazers in the 80s and 90s who were really just doing things no one else was doing. And then they got comfortable. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with getting comfortable because, you know, again, that's a very nice place to be. People make decisions on their own life. I mean, that's fine. But you're exactly right, is we have this strong innate ability to problem solve, but there's also a time where you also like to lean a bit more on comfort and stability, which I think everybody does. I think it's probably an aged thing, you know, coming into 40s and 50s and 60s, you want more stability than instability. But that's then the issue is, like I said, I felt it, and I felt it creeping in around December, and it's like, you know, it was like December, January. Okay, how do we keep pushing forward? How do we keep this process going, because there's still so much work to be done? And it's kind of where I was back when I hit 30, you know, is it's like I had everything I needed in life. And it's like, nope, let's throw that away. Let's figure out what the next challenge is, because there's more people to help. There's more patients to serve. There's more teams, you know, that we can build. And I mean, there's a lot more we can do. And it's like, that's now what the next step is. It's like, just keep that mindset, just keep moving.
It's crazy too, because I think in this specific scenario, if you think about somebody who's blazing a trail, in an environment that would that would have a trail, like, or somebody trailing close behind us, even as a competitor. I think that you could excuse falling on comfort.
Oh, absolutely. Easier. It's like, I mean,
somebody's going to get to our point and then maybe take up the mantle of, I'm going to push one step further.
Even harder.
Right. And that's like, cool, you're advancing. But the thing is, at least around here, from what I can tell, and I think you would agree, is like, nope.
No,
we're just gonna have to keep pushing because there's nobody really pushing behind us.
And I think, you know, one of the things that, you know, I was just talking to one of our mentees' boyfriends last night about this, is I said, you know, really what the veterinary profession, small animal medicine, of course, you know, since the 80s, 90s, is that, you know, really for us, it's very comparable to the American colonization of the West. You know, is that you kind of had two different things. You had those people that just jumped into a covered wagon, you know, they had their oxen and it's just head west. But then you also kind of had the railroad companies that were also pushing ground to head west. So you kind of had those initial pioneers, but then you had, you know, the industry, you had the corporations sort of coming after them. And, you know, it's like, have we really reached the Pacific yet? And have the railroads really reached the Pacific yet? You know, and if the railroads stopped, or the railroads are trying, if the railroads stopped at the Mississippi and they're like, everything from the Mississippi to the Pacific is just sort of free territory, you know, and it's like,
we don't need that.
Yeah, there's no statehood, you know, there's nothing like that. Is that, you know, really that's where we're still at, is that as a profession, there's a lot of us still in these covered wagons moving west and trying to colonize. And it's, you know, we're just trying to make our claim, so to speak. And you know, part of that tradition, part of that comfort is, oh yeah, hell yeah, we need people to stop and keep their wagons in one particular area, because that's where the town develops. And once the town develops, the railroad comes in, you know. So it's, you know, I think that there is time where comfort is necessary. I think we agree upon that. And there is someone to sort of take up the reins and keep it moving forward. But I think there's just too many people staying in town, you know, and there's a really nasty hurricane out there, you know, tornado out there, that it's like, well, I don't want to go run through that.
I don't want to go over those Rocky Mountains.
I'm not going
That
there.
looks really difficult. That's funny though, because like we keep bringing up these different metaphors, and it's like, wait a second, that works really well, because what happened when they hit the Pacific? The gold rush. Massive. It was huge. That was that took America to a whole nother level. And now that you bring that up, it's like, shit. Well, I don't know. I don't feel like we've gotten there yet, because it's been
the profession's not on the Pacific coast yet.
No. Well, even us as individuals, even if the railroad hasn't caught up yet, you know, they're still back on the other side of Mississippi, whatever. We're still not at the coast either. And the funny part is, as soon as I'm just bringing it up as a curious point, because at some point I believe we'll get there.
We have to.
Right.
Failure's not an option.
And my curiosity is, okay, when we get there
Yeah.
and then word gets out,
Yeah.
what's going to happen?
Yeah.
How many people are going to rush there?
Yeah.
Now I'm super curious.
Yeah. I hope everybody.
I hope everybody does too.
Yeah, I honestly, I mean, when you start talking about blazing new trails, I mean, that's the idea.
That's the revolution.
That's the revolution. And I think for us, it's like, yeah, those initial, people who did move west, it's like, yeah, they probably didn't reap the benefit of the gold rush, but a whole lot of people did.
Right.
And I think that's where I see the future of our profession is, yeah, let's cut these trails. And we may end up saying we have to leave tradition behind. Tradition's still going to be there. There's going to be these pockets, and we basically split off and we start running side by side. Tradition's over there doing its thing. Tradition is comfort. Tradition is stability. So there's going to be those individuals who want to maintain tradition, maintain stability. It won't be for too much longer. That's you're going to hit the Grand Canyon and fall over the edge, because the needs within the cultural aspect of our profession, the service and the talent part of our profession is the tradition is going to stop very, very soon. But that's okay. Maybe it's in our professional career. Maybe it's not. Maybe we get another 10, 20 years before tradition completely collapses. We won't have another economic collapse that tradition can move through. I mean, when that happens, you will find the majority of tradition is going to die out. But to say that we have this other thing running side by side and saying, nope, we're breaking new ground. We're not trying to change tradition. We're just saying, hey, here's all the problems. Here's our solutions we're going on with, who's coming with us. That's where we say that really what we're trying to do is we're not trying to necessarily build clinics. We're not trying to own clinics. We're not trying to, fine, yeah, we may have multiple ownership or however that turns out, but really we're building leaders. We want to build people who are coming with us to the Pacific, to the end, popping through the tornado, popping through the hurricane, all those different analogies that we have is we're building leaders.
Right.
So for us to take that dynamic is you want to talk about the influx of corporate medicine. You want to talk about these things that are really going to start to hurt tradition. The corporate clinics, the corporate environment is just trying to push out tradition. And that is the sidestep. The sidestep is let's buy out tradition and we're just going to institute corporate policy. Well, then everyone's an employee. Everyone is working for the corporation. Everyone is working for, you have, someone working in Wisconsin, having a corporation based out of New York to then, have these, you don't have local influence. You may have, regional, medical directors and regional administrators and things like that. But really, when you start to talk about the ground level, I mean, the culture of our profession is so necessary that it's maintained and focused at the clinic on the ground level. You have to have local ownership.
Yeah.
You have to. There's no question around it. You have to have local. And we're not talking about partners.
No.
That's the big difference. You can't have a multi-tiered corporate organization where you have an owner in Ohio, you have a part owner in Nebraska, and a part owner in Alaska. And those three are all weighing in and voting on policy that's going to affect someone in Southern California, that's going to affect someone in the Florida Keys.
Yeah.
Like that is not going to work.
No.
So to have that local influence, that's what we're talking about, is the creation of leaders and the creation of leaders owning clinics, which we can help facilitate that ownership. You then start to create a system that is in direct opposition of corporate medicine. We're not saying tradition and corporate medicine are our only paths. We're saying, nope, right now we have tradition that's sort of dying into corporate medicine. And we're saying, nope, hey, guess what?
Yeah.
There is this other path
Yep.
that we can teach, and we can build those leaders. We can create comfort in that line. There's definitely going to be little towns. There's going to be a little comfort. There's going to be these things as we move through our path.
Right.
But in the end, it comes down to building leaders.
Yeah.
It's
so it's you keep mentioning corporate medicine.
Yeah.
That's not just medicine, FYI.
Yeah.
It's corporate America. So just a quick aside, because I think what you're saying is we start to just dive into, okay, one of the three key pieces that's broken is culture, right?
Yep.
Well, as you mentioned all of this corporate stuff, my mom's worked for Liberty Mutual for 25 years,
Sure.
something like that.
Yeah.
Most of my life.
Big in Wausau.
Huge. They bought out Wausau Insurance, and ever since, they were based out of Boston. Now they're based out of Maine, whatever. They own Safeco, which is in Seattle.
Sure.
But they've got this little pocket in Wausau, Wisconsin.
Right.
And the funny part is, my mom's very different from me.
Sure.
She doesn't play into culture all that much. She's very, very high C, critical, attention detail.
Yeah.
And every time I ask her about how her work environment is, just dog shit.
Yeah.
Just awful.
Yeah.
Because and the only time, like, she doesn't complain about her team that's in-house.
Sure.
It's about the individuals that are trying to run their culture from Boston and from Seattle.
Absolutely.
And it doesn't freaking work.
No, it doesn't work.
Because they live completely different lives. Like, for example, and my mom's very conservative, and a lot of people that work there are exceptionally conservative. Yeah. But there was, like, at the Wausau branch, there was a huge stink because they changed their health insurance to cover transition surgeries for those that are, gender.
Yeah.
And, like, the Wausau area, like, they lost their shit about it. I'm not paying for that.
Yeah.
But in Boston and Seattle,
massive.
Totally normal.
Yeah.
It's like, absolutely. They're just going to do it because different worlds.
Absolutely.
So that model, because of, again, an uncountable number of variables, that model of nationwide type ownership, I completely agree, is dead. And I think it's going to shine through Wausau Tiles going through that, because when Bill Kresge died, his sister, I believe, took over. She lives in California.
Sure.
And their turnover has gone up.
I would have to imagine.
Because Bill was on the floor.
Yep.
Like, that guy walked the floor of his facilities every day until he died.
Yep.
I think, I don't quote me on it, but I'm pretty sure he died in one of his facilities.
Oh, shit.
And he just had a heart attack and just fell over dead.
Whatever it was,
But so that company has seen massive transitions from going from nothing 50 years ago.
Yeah.
Scoring a contract with McDonald's to now the biggest in their industry, and now they're seeing this huge change because there's this difference in culture.
Yeah.
So taking culture and now looking at our industry, what's broken? Just give me the rundown of what's broken.
Yeah, I think single-handedly, I think when you look at what is broken about culture, is that it's what I've coined as being this failed bond spectrum alignment. And I think our bond spectrum needs to be defined several different ways. But when you look at the human-animal bond, is everyone is going to sort of define their bond to their animal, which in our company we call patient. So every caregiver, every patient, that bond is going to be defined differently. On one side of the spectrum, you're going to have this really high anthropomorphized attachment, massive attachment. This is my baby. And it's not even a sense, I mean, there's the coin term fur babies, but really it's even kind of starting to go beyond fur baby now to where, no, this is an actual like human in our household.
This is my child.
This is my actual child.
I hold this creature with the same regard as I do a
Absolutely.
human.
Absolutely. No difference. Yeah. And we're not even saying that level of attachment is in households where they do or don't already have human children. Mm-hmm. We're talking about just the actual attachment on how they view this animal in their household. So then you swing in the other direction and you say, now we have maybe a older definition of the human animal bond, like something you would have seen coming out of the 60s and 70s, the man's best friend. I mean, this was an era where animals didn't live in the house. We had an outside dog, we had outside cats, because again, even from a care standpoint, I mean, the care of small animals didn't really develop until the 80s and 90s to the extent that it is today. But even in that pre-era, so we talk about people who were maybe born in the 20s and 30s, coming into what they viewed the attachment to an animal, to now people born in the 2000s to early 2000s, 2010s, things in that regard. So when we start to talk about the people coming through our front door, so these people who are responsible for caring for their patients, so the caregivers come through our door and they have their particular bond alignment, whether it's fur baby down to man's best friend, a working dog, something like that. They have mutual respect for their patients, but their actual emotional bond is much, much different.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
That's the caregiver coming through the door. Now we need to talk about the bond spectrum alignment of people in the profession. Mm-hmm. So now we have between the doctors to the certified technicians or veterinary nurses to the assistants to the front end staff. So now we talk about not even a difference on bond spectrum alignment for the position to say that doctors are always different than medical support. That's not true. We're talking about even people within that. So you take 5 doctors, how are they aligning? You take 5 technicians, how are they aligning? 5 medical support and caregiver support. how are they aligning? So now when we start talking about this failed bond spectrum alignment, is that when there is no widely accepted definition of what the human-animal bond is, there is an incredible opportunity for failed culture.
Oh, yeah.
Because what ends up happening is you have, say, a caregiver who comes through the door that they align low. So it's man's best friend, right? So this is just my dog, and dogs. We only do so much for dogs because they either have a job or whatever it happens to be. But there's only going to be so much we're going to do for our animal. And they enter into a medical environment where that bond spectrum is very, very high with, say, the doctor and maybe the medical support, but not the front staff. Maybe the front staff is like, oh yeah, you only do so much for dogs, but then the medical support staff and the doctor, it's fur baby.
Yeah.
So now we have a doctor or medical support coming into an environment where now they're judging this particular individual and saying, ugh, I care more for your patient than you care for it.
I can't believe you wouldn't do this.
I can't believe you wouldn't do this.
Yeah.
And I think one of my perfect examples is, when we start to see some of the, and I'm not saying all are this way, I'm just saying, as an example is saying, we have these feline practices, right? So a cat practice, and that's all they do is just see cat, specialty cat practice. And, I always kind of make the joke, what happens when, Farmer Dan brings in a feral barn cat?
Right.
What is that person going to be subjected to? Cat's never been vaccinated. Cat's never been spayed or neutered. But damn, cat is the best mouser he has on his property, and it keeps infestation low. Yeah. And it's it's not particularly feral. It's relatively tame, but it's like he wants to do what he can to keep that cat alive. What's going to happen when he goes into that practice? Is he going to be disparaged? Is there going to be a certain level of disparagement where it's like, well, don't you know they need to be spayed and neutered? This leads to, overpopulation. Don't you know they need to be vaccinated? Don't you know? And no, they don't. Not everyone does. Not everyone has the same medical knowledge that we do, that there is viral testing. There are things we vaccinate for. There are things, because some people just have never had that exposure because they've never taken a farm cat to the vet. This is the first time, and they say, hey, oh God, there's a new cat vet in town. I have a sick cat. That's where I need to go because I bring sick cats there. So that's one of the ways in which we sort of have this bond spectrum change, and then you can kind of go the other way too, is where you have someone come through the door with incredibly high alignment. This is my fur baby, and then you have a culture, or you have a veterinarian, or you have a technician, or front end staff, whatever happens to be, and they're more in the spectrum of man's best friend. Yeah, and it's like, well, it's just a dog, it's just a cat, and it's like, well, how dare you say that? Or for me, what usually hits me is I often refer to our patients as patients, and I just the patient. And sometimes I'll get burned for, it's like, well, her name is Macy. Yeah. And it upsets me that you keep saying patient. And it's like, and I have to kind of take pause, and I'm like, well, for us, we use patient and we use caregiver as very universal terms. Yeah. So we're not saying owner, we're not saying pet parent, we're not saying these things, because really, if you look at all those different definitions, all of the people who come through the door are responsible for caring for their patient, and that's the idea where we're sort of having this universal term. But I have to remind myself that sometimes there are people who align so high that they don't like universal terminology. They like
personalized service.
Personalized service. Yeah. So there's times where even I failed that model, but when you start to look at this failed bond spectrum alignment, is that all in all, when you look at sort of the three parts that we talk about with culture, is our ununified profession, failed engagement, and disparagement, is really when we start to talk about the ununified profession, this is what we're talking about. There is no one standard definition of how we as veterinarians, we as technicians, we as medical support, we as caregiver support are supposed to align. There's no universal acceptance of how are we supposed to treat people when we come through. If I think every animal's a fur baby, but they think every animal's man's best friend, and when we sort of have that ununified profession, let's just take a scenario. So we talked about the difference between caregivers and support staff is sort of the difference in opinion there. Let's say we then have that breakdown between different veterinarians, different technicians, different medical support, different caregiver support, and now we're talking about treating a patient with a terminal condition. We're treating a patient with an aggressive toxicity. We're treating a patient with any other number of things, even down to even say preventative diseases, whether we're providing heartworm preventative, flea and tick preventative. I mean, you can break it down however you want. But let's talk about the scenario where we have maybe these geriatric cats, or we have end-stage patients being hospitalized. And now we start to have this disparity within the medical team where we say, oh, well, Dr. A would have never treated this. Well, Dr. B is treating this too much. Dr. C is now talking about Dr. A and Dr. B, and and then the medical support. And then you start to see where the staff, and having just the cultural break, just this break in bond spectrum, starts to polarize the staff. You then start to see where some group are going with Dr. A, some group is with B, some group is with C, and then we start to have this significant breakdown in culture, because then it's just the little snide things. It's like, I work with her today,
right?
I work with him today. It's like, I just need to get through this. Or you'll have where, as time moves on, everyone finds their place in the world, right? So you have a clinic where that clinic culture, everybody who's there who hasn't been quit or hasn't been fired, the whole environment for that clinic, fur babies.
Yeah.
The whole clinic.
Yep.
So then a new technician comes in, or a new doctor comes in, and we start to talk about, toxic work environments, right? So we're still talking about just the ununified profession component to this, right? So we start to talk about, sort of the ununified profession, these toxic environments. And what ends up happening is when you start to look at accountability in these toxic environments, no one's really owning their own individual part in what has added to the toxicity of this environment. So you can say, on one hand, you have the culture of the clinic that has a failed bond spectrum because all they do is treat fur babies. This team is unreceptive to anyone else who doesn't define the human-animal bond this way.
Right.
And then we try and get that to the owners, veterinarians. They're like, we need to find veterinarians to help us. We need to find technicians to help us. We're going to take whoever we can get and just jump them into the team. And then the veterinarian or the technician, whoever else is coming into the team, they're not adequately prepared, and they also then try to fight the system.
Yeah.
So they have no oversight to say, well, how am I as an individual going to integrate into this new team? Because one, I don't bond spectrum align with this particular team. I actually don't even realize that there is a bond spectrum. I don't even know that I'm supposed to align anyway. I just know that me working here is killing me.
Right.
And the staff is killing me.
And I don't even have words to put to it.
Yeah, I don't even have a way of adequately defining this toxic work environment. All I know is that she's a bitch and I hate him.
Yeah.
And they think I'm a bitch and he hates me.
Yep.
So
now I don't want to go to work.
Now I don't want to go to work. And that's the only sort of definition, or the only, like you said, we don't have the words, right? So all we have looked at is saying, here is a subset of problems, but I don't have the skills to adequately problem solve. I don't have the tools to adequately create solutions and implement those solutions. All I know is I'm stuck.
Yeah.
And what the hell do I do next?
Yep.
And so then when we have, say, the owners or, whoever else is there, then we start to look at sort of that hierarchy, and we say, well, we need to have doctors. Well, I'm going to continue to keep this doctor in my environment because I need someone to see appointments with a license. So then when we start to have sort of, sort of that ununified profession, then we have people staying in our team who may or may not should be there, or may or may not should be there. But I think a bigger part of it is it's a reevaluation of the entire team. So maybe this doctor actually is a perfect fit for the clinic of tomorrow. This is the individual who actually needs to be in the profession. And we look at sort of then the argument of the tradition side. Well, this is tradition. This is what's been here. This is what we've had implemented. But this is actually, the clinic is what does not actually engage our clients appropriately, our caregivers appropriately, our patients appropriately. And that's where we sort of come into then the second part of sort of our failed culture is that then it's failed engagement.
Yeah.
So then what it boils down to is, how are anybody in a team, whether we're talking public relations or we're even talking discussing wellness and disease prevention, we're talking about disease management, diagnosis, and detection. what then happens when we can't engage our team appropriately? Doctors can't trust technicians, medical support, so on and so forth, or they can't trust the doctor, or the owners aren't trusting part of the staff or the office managers. Because again, like we had said before, is depending on how they sort their problems, if all problems are going up through management,
right,
and now it's a matter of he said, she said, what tools do we actually have to break through he said, she said, so that, the sort of, guts of it come out so we can identify the problems to create solutions and then sort of implement what those solutions are. So when you look at failed engagement, I think failed engagement goes on just culturally, not even from a business standpoint, but I think culturally when we talk about failed engagement, it's kind of like, we had said earlier on in this conversation, is that if we start to have failed alignment in an ununified clinic, failed engagement is going to be, like we said, when someone comes through and they are upset already coming in. Maybe they're upset because of the state of affairs with their patient. Maybe they're coming in because they're upset or worried about finances. They're coming in, upset because of previous experiences they had. Yep. They're upset because of what medical support staff is on, because they don't like working with one particular doctor. So the failed engagement then becomes in, well, how do we address this? How do we fix this? How do we address this caregiver coming through the door? How do we address the veterinarian that's not integrating into the staff? How do we address the staff that's not allowing a new veterinarian to integrate into the staff, or a new technician to integrate into the staff with new techniques and so on and so forth? And that's that failed engagement. Is it so much easier to do nothing?
Right.
Don't do anything.
Just let them do their thing. I'll do my thing, and we'll have our little tribes, and we'll survive.
Yep. And maybe for a short period of time.
Yeah.
Well, we know technicians are surviving 7 years and they're out of the profession, which is a terrible statistic. But you're exactly right. Is we have these groups, and that was one of the things I identified at my first job. Is individually I got along with all the staff. Individually, and I like to think of myself as a very inviting person. I try to be. There are times when I'm not, but I think in general I try to be inclusive. And that was one of the things that I saw at my first job was, the night crew did not get along with the day crew. The front staff did not get along with the back staff. And so then you have like this weird triangle where like the night back staff hates the day front staff the worst, because they're like exactly opposite of each other.
Yep.
So when you start to see this failed engagement, it's then, well, what do you do as an office manager? And when you look at then an office manager who is in charge of culture, in charge of clinic ordering, in charge of hiring and firing, in charge of this, in charge of this, in charge of this, and that one person is responsible for doing all of these things, there's no way you're going to be able to address failed engagement. You're just going to be like, yeah, maybe.
I'm just going to put this person that aligns with this group into this group.
Yep.
And hopefully a war doesn't break out at some point.
Yeah. Very, very early on in my employment in the central Wisconsin area at the clinic that we then bought, it was a very open schedule system.
Okay.
It was just, when can you work? Anybody? When can you work? We are in your debt. When can you work? We are doing a favor to us. When can you work? And what it then turned into was, people pretty much just want to work with Carlo. And it's, again, I feel very honored, that I'm able to sort of bring that to the team, very easygoing, and, medicine's on point and so on and so forth. But then we start to have these crews developing where Carlo doesn't work every weekend. Carlo works every other weekend.
Yeah.
And Carlo doesn't work day shifts. Carlo works night shifts.
Yep.
So we were starting to find that, or at least I was starting to find that I was starting to get, I'm like, man, this place is fantastic. I got all the great technicians. I got all the great support staff. This place really has its stuff together. And, then it was like, 1/3 of the time.
Right.
Everyone else is sort of spread out. And, I don't think it's necessarily appropriate to say the people who were on those off weekends, the doctors who were on those off weekends were incapable. It's that they were unsupported.
Right.
And that's a big differentiating factor.
And that support sourced likely out of this bond spectrum.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's where then when you start to have, because don't get me wrong, there are people who in the beginning did not like how I bond aligned. And me, I'm universal. I'm universal.
Right.
I have a job to do.
You're just more willing to be on the lower end than I think a lot of people are used to.
Absolutely. I am equally as aligned on the low end as I am on the high end. Because for me, my bond attachment to a patient is exactly defined by the person coming through the door.
Right.
Is I'm going to work within the confines that this person has and recognize that the caregiver bringing the patient to our door wants the best for that animal by their definition. Now, I do believe that there's a certain amount of coaching. There's a certain amount of education. I think there's a certain amount of responsibility that we have as veterinarians to maybe sort of bring people into both directions. Maybe when you have a really, really high alignment for a baby, we need to sort of very gently remind them that, okay, well, I understand that you have a high anthropomorphization, but we do have to recognize that the confines we have in our profession, and this sort of touches on to the lack of infrastructure in our service industry, which that's a whole nother area. We sort of need to remind them and saying, well, we don't have all of the luxuries that they actually have on the human side. So you kind of have to bring those down. Same thing from sort of the low end. You have to kind of bring those up and saying, well, we actually do have more options and more opportunity than you are actually aware of in how you can care for patients.
Yeah.
So it's actually kind of you try to sort of merge them in the middle, but very much assuming that people need that help. And I think that's where, like I said, being sort of in my mind and saying you align how the person comes through the door is what you're basically trying to, sort of empathize with their state and then doing the best that you can for that animal in that particular circumstance. It may not be perfect, but the world isn't.
Well, the thing, I hate to bring up a specific example because very few people were there, but I think we can use general variables. The Great Dane that came in a month ago and had the GDV.
Sure.
That Kenny did, actually, and you had helped him with.
Yeah.
I think you talked to her for at least a half an hour.
Probably.
At least. Because I wasn't even in the room.
Caregiver.
Yes. I wasn't even in the room. But I know how that conversation went because the first part of it was you listening to her.
Absolutely.
And being empathetic to the point of where do you align?
Yep.
Because you want to hold that neutral position and just, this is where you are.
Yep.
This is what's available within that range of your tolerance within this spectrum, right?
Correct.
The second part of that conversation was, okay, here's what's available.
Yep.
The third part was, here's what you can predict thereafter. Because he was, 9?
Old.
He was older, especially for that size of an animal.
Yeah.
30 minutes. At least. And then there was a secondary conversation once we started to...
Oh, absolutely. Get diagnostic results.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's like, how many times does that happen? And it's not even to say that you were more aligned with her because you weren't. It wasn't the point. No. So you take all of that, right? And then you say, because I personally, that's yep, that's the right way to do it. Yeah. You go with what they're comfortable with. Yeah. If you have a full staff that's able to do that, ooh, that's dangerous. Yeah. That's dangerous because that sounds really effective. Yeah. Because everyone then can speak the same language. Yep. But you have to get a direction from somebody without the full empathy on the front end you had. Yeah. It's hard to do that. Yeah. It's just I'm kind of just talking out of my ass here. No. I apologize, but it's cool that you're able to take that one idea of this alignment within this and I think a lot of our communication outside just in general is similar to this where it's, how are you and I as just individuals aligned on this specific topic. I have to listen to you to understand where you are in alignment on this set of variables, and you have to listen to me also so that we're on the same page. So that's pretty much
but how often, I don't want to just blame America, but how often does that actually happen in our current culture of our country? We can't even have that discussion where I'm listening to you and you're listening to me on body autonomy. We can't even have that discussion on global climate change. Right. We can't even have that discussion on really anything from a right standpoint. It's just everyone is like, this is what I think and this is what I have, and this is what I think and this is what I have, and it's like, but that is not how a society is built. That's not how a team is built.
This is the quote that just drives me up a wall. This is my truth.
Yes.
That makes me right.
Yes.
It's like, nope, you can have that.
Yes.
But the comma and the stuff that comes thereafter, that's where I'm not okay with it.
Yeah. So I think, really when we start to talk about, sort of the bond spectrum and so on and so forth, to really be able to say, I'm going to listen while you talk and you're going to listen while I talk, and understand each other, not just listen for the sake of replying.
Right.
I think that's the big takeaway is that, really when we start to talk about fixing culture and how that integrates into the team, is neutrality. Is I think with a certain amount of understanding, you have to remain neutral in saying, all right, I have to set myself aside. And I think one of the things very, very early on, when we first started developing core values, very, very early on in PAW, which I think would have been the first year or two, is we talked about checking your ego at the door. And part of it is while you are here for this time that you are in this business, the only thing that we ask you to do is be happy while you're here.
Yeah.
And I think for us to look at saying, rates of pay are well above national standards, the benefits we give to the support staff are above standards. All these different things that we do, that's one part. Don't worry about your financial health while you're here, because I can't have you thinking about your financial health while you're here. We have to be looking at ways to serve the patient. Same thing comes into then, with the ego component and sort of the bond spectrum alignment is when you step outside of our door, do whatever you want. Fur baby, man's best friend, take whatever alignment you want when you're out of here. But in our environment, we have to maintain neutrality. We have to be able to make a certain level of comfort for any caregiver that comes through our front door. We have to treat them with the same respect across the board, because that's what they need. They don't need someone judging them, because they're already in, again, like we said before, they're concerned because of finances, they're concerned because of the health of their patient, whatever they're concerned about that day, maybe they got some stuff going on with their kids, it doesn't matter. The reality is that they all need to be treated as equals when they come through, and that doesn't always work. And I think it doesn't work for a few reasons. It doesn't always work for caregivers. Some people do not like to be treated like equals. I have come across that multiple times where they don't want, they want to feel special. They want to feel like they are somehow more important than everyone else in the lobby. Everyone else who's there of equal importance, they want to feel that. Same thing goes for when we have doctors, we have medical support, we have caregiver support, we have technical support. When they come in, I want to be more important than everybody. And this is then leading into that third bubble of disparagement I'm going to be more important because look at how much debt I have.
Oh yeah.
Look at me. I got student loan debt. Maybe I own the place and I have business debt. I have a new building. I have business debt. Look at how important I am, because I am actually more important than any of my other veterinarians, because look at how much debt I have. And I've taken on this risk, which no one else has taken on this risk. So you need to treat me differently because of my debt.
Hold me in higher regard because of the decisions I've made that have put me backwards.
Exactly. And I think then we say, okay, well, so that's disparagement. So hold me on a higher pedestal and I'm going to look down on you, and anything that you say is less worthy than me. But one of the favorite things I heard was the same thing comes through the specialty side.
Okay.
So when you start to look at people who then they get your doctor of veterinary medicine or a veterinary medical doctor degree, depending on what school you went to, is you get that, and then you go on to internship, you go on to residency, and then now you're an internist, now you're a board certified surgeon, now you're a dermatologist, now you're an ophthalmologist, whatever happens to be. This is who you are now. You have advanced degree beyond just your standard veterinary degree to then become a specialist. So in disparagement, a portion of disparagement is actually what happens through the university level. We talk about getting, the hurricane, right? So, the tornado is the first part of that windstorm is you getting through your training curriculum. And part of that disparagement is highly based in hierarchy. I am a specialist. I am more important than you. I have been here. I have the degree. I have the knowledge. And with that knowledge comes power. So it's not just, I am in higher regard because of my debt. I am in higher regard because I hold the information. You need to come to me for answers. You cannot treat a heart case unless you go to a cardiologist. You cannot do an ultrasound unless you're a radiologist. You cannot treat this unless you are an endocrinologist, blah, 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 blah. So part of that disparagement then happens at the university level, where it's like, oh, well, I'm more important because I have more information. And if I have more information and knowledge, I have more power. So now anyone who deals with me they know less than I do. Mm-hmm. So the technicians know less than I do. I am of higher esteem because I have more information. And that's what we're taught, is we're actually taught disparagement. And it's saying, so now you come into a group. So now we're talking about the whole bond spectrum. Now we're coming into a group where, as a doctor, you have a failed bond spectrum alignment with your team, but you are held in higher regard because you've been taught disparagement, because now you're the veterinarian and the whole staff needs to listen to me because that's who I am and I have this degree and I have this power. Mm-hmm. And one of my favorite things was, I had heard there was it was a university level. There was a doctor who was a specialist, who then, as I think one of the other heads of the rotation, was a twice specialist. They had both emergency degree and even, I think, in internal medicine. Or it was something like that. They basically had two specialties. And the clinician who had two specialties was standing there next to the doctor with one specialty, and they were working with a veterinary student. Yep. And the veterinary student had called the one specialty doctor by her first name. And she was like, ugh, how dare you? I have a specialist degree. You will call me Dr. So-and-so. I have earned the right of saying, you call me doctor.
Interesting.
So then the 1 degree doctor to the 2 degree doctor said, hey, Tim, can you do this for me? And he looked right to her and said, I have gained 2 degrees. So in what world do you think you with 1 can talk to me and I have 2? And she just sort of sat there like, oh my God. And he looked right to the student and said, all of us here can be talked to by first name.
It ended well.
And it was right there. I was like, that is what I'm talking about an environment where we teach this innate disparagement, but you need someone to be like, you know what? I got the power, and I'm willing to wield that power because I'm going to invest in you as an individual. And it was right then I said that is what I'm talking about, the profession. Uh-huh. That is when we start to talk about disparagement, and that is the fix. Yeah. And that's why when we start to talk about disparagement, and when you look at sort of our 3 hex problem, that's why disparagement is so close in our triangle to the talent region, because in that talent region, disparagement is a huge thing. We get it so early in our career that there's a significant amount of disparagement. But then all of it bleeds together. All of it bleeds into this failed spectrum alignment between what you're taught yourself. You're important because you have this degree. You're important because you have this debt. You're important because you have the knowledge. You're important because you have this. But then you jump into a team where the whole bond spectrum alignment we've been talking about has been the human-animal bond. Right. But really, then we start to talk about like in that particular spectrum, there's then going to be the informational spectrum. So then it's, from a veterinarian who has the most amount of training to a caregiver who has no training because they're an animal caregiver, right? To then say we're making assumptions in that whole spectrum of information and power, where on the veterinary side, it's like, I am the one who's holding all of this information and you need to get this information from me, but you know what? I'm probably going to look down upon you if you ask me questions. Mm-hmm. It's like, stop wasting my time with this. I don't have the time to answer that question. You should know that. You should know that heartworm preventative needs to be given in dogs year round. You should know that ectoparasite control are these options. You should know that your dog should be spayed and neutered. You should know. But I don't have the time to teach you. You should know how to manage a diabetic, but I don't have a lot of time to really talk about all of diabetes, between twice a year urine testing, to blood checks, to fructosamine, to glucose curves, to spot glucose checks, to insulin administration, to clinical signs to look for. I'm going to tell you about that in 20 minutes, and then that should be as much time as you need, because now you know.
So I align much closer on the education side to the caregiver side.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm getting closer to the middle.
Yeah, you're pulling in. Yeah.
You just said a whole lot of words.
Yeah.
No idea what any of that means.
No idea.
It would take me a hell of a lot longer than 20 minutes to understand that,
Absolutely.
even at an
Basic.
elementary level.
So what happens? Google. Mm-hmm. So if you are, let's talk about bond spectrum. You are a caregiver who aligns very, very high. Mm-hmm. Fur baby, this is my child. I want to know everything that I can to take care of this animal. But you are maybe in a clinic where they don't have the time, they don't have the service, they don't have the attachment. You're asking too many questions, and people go online. I have people who come through my door and they, sit in an exam room. Like I said, 30 minutes is a pretty common average first consultation time for me. Yep. And I go through my clinical history and, we kind of sift out a few things and they say, I'm sorry. I went online and I kind of did some research on this. And I'm like, perfect. What did you find? Mm-hmm. And they kind of look at me and I'm like, yes. If you are a person who is trying to self-educate for the betterment of your own knowledge and the betterment of your patient, you are exactly who I want to be working with.
But your thought pattern on that is completely backwards from the industry.
Right.
I shouldn't say just individuals, because how many, I posted the thing the other day just as a joke. It's like paging Dr. Google, right?
Yeah.
Because
even in our own team.
Yeah, absolutely. Because it's so hard because I did all of this work. Yeah. I've been taught so long to be the one source of information. And when you walk in and you're just trying to overtake me.
Right.
You're just trying to be smarter than me.
Yes, you are. Yeah. And listen, who did you get that information from? Mm-hmm. You got that information from your breeder? You got that information from what website? It's like, stop. No. Okay, what information did you get? And this is what I say to people. I say, perfect. What information did you get? Because I'm going to help you sift through the stuff that is and is not true. Mm-hmm. And they kind of look at me. They're like, oh, I had never considered the stuff that I got wasn't true. Perfect. Here's what I found. And then there's a little bit of a ballet. You say, oh, well, that was true about 30 years ago. So it's not wrong. It was just true a couple decades ago. It's outdated. Mm-hmm. So that's then, this is, I think, all, part of the conversation is what did we then do? We took 2.5 years to develop our caregiver resources, 1-page documents that contain pretty much the nuts and bolts of everything you need to know to manage a disease. And I said, there's 2 ways people are going to use there's 3 ways people are going to use caregiver resources. Caregiver resources, we're going to print them off, we're going to throw them away. There's one. Yep. The other end of the spectrum is they're going to take it and they're going to use it as the framework for their own self-education. Mm-hmm. Take this paper, know that we've put years into developing these, and it's the nuts and bolts. Take bullet point 1. Take 4 hours to educate yourself on bullet point 1. Use this as a roadmap, right? And then there's going to be the people right in the middle where they're like, yeah, this is perfect. This is exactly what I need. So when am I coming back? Okay, perfect. Yeah. And I think a lot of times how I conclude conversations when, just the other day, 2 days ago, 3 days ago, I had a patient who foreign body patient with corn cob. Yep. I had to take out 6 inches of intestine, got the corn cob out. Mm-hmm. And in that particular consultation, it was, guess what I found out? That dog has allergic skin disease, it has food allergies, environmental allergies, it has chronic inflammatory bowel issues, which are probably related to a dietary hypersensitivity. We talked about some of the old wives' tales, and it was the owning caregiver and her 2 parents there, and they were just there for a foreign body consult. I could have just been in and out. It's like, yep, your dog probably ate this and it probably has an obstruction, but that's not what they paid for. They paid for a physical examination consultation.
I was going to bring that up.
Yeah.
Like, what's one of the primary questions I get on the front end, especially over the phone when I say what our medical exam fee is what do I get out of that? Yeah. The first thing I say is you get a highly educated veterinarian to answer all of your questions.
Absolutely. And some of those questions you do have to be tactful in because some of them are crazy. You just have to get away from some of the really, let's just table that question for right now. Let's focus on the more important things at hand. So there are times, but I would say the vast majority of the population, they actually have all the same questions all the time. Yeah. For the most part. You get a vomiting patient in, they're going to ask you the same 30 questions. It happens every single time. And so what I have done over the years is that, for me, what's the definition of insanity? Doing
the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result.
Thank you.
Yes.
So over the years, it's like, I don't want to keep getting asked this question every single time I have a vomiting consultation. So now I just include the answer in my pitch.
Yeah.
I say, you know what? And I get some history from them, and I said, just give me, I say, please interrupt me at any time. But based on the information I acquired over the last 15 to 20 minutes, I have some things, and physical exam is going to come into this, and I'm going to kind of pitch some things together. And then at the end of it, I say, do you have any questions? And the biggest compliment is no.
Yeah.
The one gentleman with this corn cob patient, he thought dogs ate grass before it rained. That was his big thing. That is just, the guy was 55 years old. He was under the impression that dogs ate grass when it rained. I was like, well, it's a non-specific sign for abdominal pain and discomfort, which is most often related to gastrointestinal upset, but it's not because they it's going to rain outside, So, but that was one of those things where, as we had kind of gotten through the whole part of it, they came back when they came to discharge, and the guy's like, we breed dogs, and the daughter, and they're like, we're going to start bringing all of our animals here, because that was the most immaculate consultation we've ever had with any veterinarian ever. Yeah. And it was like, well, yeah, I mean, I deal a lot with vomiting and diarrhea patients, so I got a lot to say about vomit and diarrhea, and maybe I'm just vomiting and diarrhea in words all the time, but the takeaway is that it's part of recognizing bond alignment, and a part of it is that we have to break this cycle of disparagement.
Right.
We have to break this knowledge as power. We have to understand that none of us in practice did any of the research for any of the data that we have. We just paid to learn it.
Yeah.
So that's the only difference between me and you and someone else, is we just paid to learn this knowledge. And the funny thing that I think about debt is that debt never dictates income. No. It's just because you're in the debt, 200,000, $500,000, 3 million, 4 million, whatever it is, that doesn't dictate how much you can make. It doesn't dictate how well you do a consultation. It doesn't dictate how you can conduct yourself from a business standpoint. We're talking about customer service.
Right.
We're not talking about disparagement, but when you start to look at all those pieces, you start to look at the ununified profession between the caregivers coming in and the staff, to the staff not being unified amongst themselves, to integrating in new staff who isn't aligned with what the clinic is, to then saying that administratively we're failing to engage caregivers appropriately on their bond spectrum, we're failing to engage our staff on their spectrum alignment, and then all in all, what's thrown on top of it is that those people who have the most amount of knowledge are taught in an environment with the most amount of disparagement. Yeah. And it trickles down.
Yeah.
And that is single-handedly, those three things can explain every problem culturally that we have in our profession.